Good evening, boys and girls, and welcome to our next edition of Tucked In Tuesday. This week we are going to be reading Creepy Carrots by Reynolds, illustrated by Peter Brown. And this is a story about Jasper Rabbit who, well, he has some interesting interactions with some carrots. Here's what the back says. It says, Jasper Rabbit loves carrots, and he can take the fattest, crispiest carrots from Crackenhopper Field anytime he wants. That is, until they start following him home. So let's read to find out what happens to Jasper in Creepy Carrots. Creepy Carrots by Reynolds, illustrated by Peter Brown. Jasper Rabbit had a passion for carrots, and the carrots that grew in Crackenhopper Field were the best, fat, crisp, and free for the taking. He pulled some up for a morning snack on the way to school. He yanked out a few on his way to Little League practice. He ripped them from the ground on his way home at night. Jasper couldn't get enough carrots until they started following him. He first noticed something strange after the big game against the East Valley Hares. Jasper was about to help himself to a victory snack when he heard it. The soft, sinister tunk, tunk, tunk of carrots creeping. He turned, but there was nothing there. Just my imagination, he thought, but he hopped a little faster. That night, as he was brushing his teeth, there they were. Jasper whipped around, but nothing. He laughed at himself, picked up his toothbrush off the floor, and went to bed, quickly. The next morning, he approached Crackenhopper Field slowly. He reached for 2 wild carrots. Nothing happened. He bit into one. Nothing happened. Whew, creepy carrots. It was ridiculous. But when he arrived home that evening, "Mom, Mom," Jasper screamed, "creepy carrots in the shed!" His mom opened the door slowly. There weren't many carrots, not even the regular kind. "There's no such thing as creepy carrots," Mom said, shaking her head. Later that night, as Jasper lay in bed, he heard it. Breathing. Terrible, carroty breathing. And there, on his wall, "Creepy carrots!" he shouted. "Dad! Dad!" His dad thumped into his bedroom and threw on the light. They searched under the bed. No creepy carrots. They looked through the closet. No creepy carrots. They opened the dresser drawers. No creepy carrots. "Just a bad dream, son," his dad said, shaking his head. "Now go to sleep." That wasn't going to happen. By the end of the week, Jasper was seeing creepy carrots creeping everywhere. Jasper knew his parents were wrong. Creepy carrots were real, and they were coming for him. But they couldn't get him if they couldn't get out. Jasper hatched a plan. First thing on Saturday, he grabbed supplies and headed to Crackenhopper Field. As the sun finally set across Crackenhopper Field, Jasper Rabbit smiled. On his way home, there was no tunk, tunk, tunk. There were no carrot-shaped shadows. His plan had worked. No creepy carrots would ever get out of that carrot patch again. And as the sun finally set, the carrots of Crackenhopper Field cheered. Their creepy plan had worked. They were sure of it. Jasper Rabbit would never get into that carrot patch ever again. So I don't think those carrots were very creepy. They seem to be pretty clever if you ask me. I don't know what I would do though if I thought carrots were chasing me and following me around. I think I'd be pretty scared too. All right, boys and girls, now let's go ahead and move on to our next few chapters of The Chocolate Touch. We've got to find out what's going to happen to our friend John Midas, who he loves chocolate and he's been eating things that turn to chocolate, but he's starting to get a little thirsty, which I think if I was eating so much chocolate, I'd be thirsty too. Let's find out what happens. Chapter 6. When the others had been excused to go for a mid-morning play, John had to go stand by Miss Plimsoll's desk. John, Miss Plimsoll said, you mustn't make up silly stories to excuse your failures. I must have the truth. What did you do with your pencil? This is it, John said, showing Miss Plimsoll the pointed stick of chocolate. Really it is. It's changed. What do you mean it's changed? Miss Plimsoll demanded. That's my pencil, John tried to explain. Only it isn't the same anymore. Nothing stays the same today if I put it into my mouth. And the same thing happened when I chewed my gloves. They were chocolate too. John, Miss Plimsoll said slowly, do you feel all right? Yes, thank you, John said. I feel all right, except, he added, I'm getting so thirsty. The water from the water fountain turned to chocolate. So did the water upstairs. I would like a drink of cold water. Yes, John, Miss Plimsoll said. She suddenly looked pale. You run out and play with the others. I'm going to have a talk with the nurse. And John, Miss Plimsoll said as he started toward the classroom door, here's another pencil. Be a good boy and try not to lose it. I'm afraid I'll have to keep this piece of chocolate until school's out. You know we don't allow anyone to eat candy in class. Miss Plimsoll put the slightly chewed chocolate pencil in her desk drawer, and John went out to look for Susan. He found her skipping rope with 2 girls in his class. John usually scorned skipping rope. He preferred hide-and-seek, tag, FBI, and spies, kick the can, or any other good, exciting game. Jumping up and down in one place just to avoid being hit by a rope seemed silly to him. But he was sorry for having spoiled Susan's silver dollar, and he was willing to make a sacrifice. Susan, he said. Susan continued to bounce on one foot as her 2 friends swung the rope over and over, excuse me, over and under, over and under, over and under her. She didn't seem to notice John. I'll skip with you, he offered. Susan stopped, and the rope was caught by her shins. Let's try doubles backwards, she said, but not to John. She ignored John. I'll go last. The one who does it the most times gets the first slice of my birthday cake. Susan looked at John, raised her eyebrows, shut her eyes, and stuck out the tip of her pink tongue. Then she turned back to the girls and smiled. Ellen whispered in Betty's ear, and Betty whispered in Susan's ear. Then all 3 of them looked at John and each other, and again, looked at each other again, and burst out laughing. Oh, Susan, John protested. I didn't mean to do it. The trouble is, there's something magic about me today. Everything I put into my mouth turns to chocolate. The girls giggled. You wouldn't like it, John said, who was beginning to feel sorrier for himself than he'd ever felt before. Excuse me, boys and girls. I think it's getting worse, he said reproachfully. At first, it was just part in my mouth that turned to chocolate, but when I nibbled the end of my pencil, the whole pencil changed. Oh, Susan said. The others hooted with glee. Maybe I'll get sick and die, John warned. Maybe I'll turn to chocolate myself. Then you'll be sorry. I don't believe one word about the chocolate, Susan said. And if it was true, you'd be glad because all you ever like eating is chocolate. If you don't believe me, John retorted, just give me that skipping rope and I'll prove it. The girls looked questioningly at each other for an instant. But as they hesitated, the bell rang and it was time to go back into the classroom. The rest of the morning passed slowly for John. He was afraid that his mother was going to be cross about the missing gloves. She might not accept the excuse that he had eaten them. He regretted his messed up arithmetic test. He was sad about Susan's anger and disbelief, and he was getting terribly thirsty. Once during geography and once during art, he was excused to get a drink of water. Both times, however, he swallowed nothing but sweet chocolate. His mouth was getting stickier and sweeter and drier by the minute. Chapter 7. All right, boys and girls, Miss Plimsoll said, it's almost time for lunch. Clear your things. Paint pot securely closed, brushes washed, paintings unpinned and laid out to dry. Drawing board stacked against the wall. Oh, there's the bell. Front row first, Timothy leading, then Robin in a single file. Go. John alone walked slowly in the throng, hurrying along the corridor to the school cafeteria. The school was proud of the cafeteria and the food they served in it. The room was spacious and bright, with windows all along the one side overlooking the playground and the playing fields beyond. The opposite side was wholly taken up by the shiny silver service counter. Several boys and girls were already settled at tables by the time John took his place in line. Enviously, John noticed a boy at a nearby table that Enviously, John noticed a boy at a nearby table suck at straws dipped in milk bottle that was almost full with frost. John could imagine the refreshing taste of cold, creamy milk. At another table, a group of girls were eating fat red cherries. John could almost feel the firm fruit on his tongue and the pleasure of biting through the tart, juicy pulp. The cherries must taste good. They must be thirst-quenching. John unhappily took a tray from the pile and slid it along the rails in front of the top counter. He put a paper napkin, a glass, a gleaming spoon, a knife, a fork, and a fork on his tray. It seemed hardly worth the while, but he felt that he might as well try the food and drink. "Perhaps if I eat a different way, without letting anything touch my lips," he muttered, "my lunch won't change to chocolate." He was not very hopeful. "What?" asked the boy standing next to him. "Nothing," John said. "I thought I heard you say something about chocolate," the boy said. "I hope this is the day for chocolate cream pie," he added. "That'd be super." On chocolate cream pie days in the past, John had been known to skip the main course so that he might spend all of his lunch money on dessert. The thought of 4 pieces of chocolate cream pie now suddenly made his stomach feel as though he were on a roller coaster, an uneasy, flibberty-gibberty sensation. John shuddered. "Okay," he commented, wrinkling up his nose. The other boy shrugged his shoulders and started to choose his meal. John took a plate of cold chicken and ham, potato chips, and a crisp, moist lettuce and tomato salad. The white of the chicken and the pink of the ham, the gold of the potatoes and the pale green of the lettuce, and the red of the tomato looked delicious. He also took half a pint of milk, a thick-crusted whole wheat roll, and a cool pat of butter, a tumbler of water with ice cubes clinking against the glass, and a dish of fresh fruit, slices of oranges and grapefruit and bananas and grapes. John's tray was loaded with just the sort of meal his mother was always trying to persuade him to eat. Until today, John had always thought it was pretty dull to eat sensible things when there were sweeter foods and drinks to be had. Today, however, the sensible things looked most appetizing, and his mouth began to water with its new sticky way. John paid for the lunch with his money his mother had given him, went to an empty table and sat down. His fingers trembling slightly with eagerness, he cut a slice of lettuce. His fork went through the leaves with a promising crunch. He stuck the prongs of the fork into a mouth-sized piece of lettuce and carefully inserted it into his mouth. The lettuce didn't touch his wide-stretched lips. John's teeth came together in crisp layers of sweet chocolate. He took a small piece of potato chip, tilted his head back until he was looking straight up at the ceiling, and dropped the morsel straight down into his throat. He felt it go down, a sharp fragment of sweet chocolate. He tried the milk, the ice water, the fruit. Every solid and liquid he had sampled was transformed as soon as it entered his mouth. Then he became aware of a shocking novelty that he hadn't noticed at breakfast. At the rim of each glass, there was a small semicircle of opaque brown. The bowl of his spoon and the prongs of his fork had become brown. John watched, horrified, as the areas of magic chocolate slowly spread until the last of the glass and cutlery were all solid chocolate. The trouble was unquestionably getting worse. John's scalp tightened with fear. "What am I going to do?" he asked himself miserably. Oh dear, what's going to happen to me?" Leaving his tray of chocolate food and drink and utensils, John stumbled away from the cafeteria and out to the playground. Chapter 8. English class passed without incident. Miss Plimsoll distributed word lists for her pupils to take home. "The more words you know," she explained, "as always, the more exactly you can think." There were some difficult new words John noticed. Indigestion, acidity, unhealthiness, moderation, digestibility. As Miss Plimsoll explained the meaning of each one, it seemed to John as though they had all had a special bearing on his present uncomfortable condition. At last the bell rang. "Very well, class," Miss Plimsoll said. "Time for outside activities. Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Miss Plimsoll." Miss Plimsoll gave the signal for dismissal, and the pupils in the front row filed out, followed by those in the second row, including John and Susan. Susan played a violin in the school orchestra, and usually she and John went to rehearsals in the auditorium together. This time, Susan hurried on ahead of him. John followed very slowly. The members of the orchestra were sitting at their music stands and in the auditorium stage when John, carrying his dark blue trumpet case, got to his chair in the brass section. Mrs. Quaver had already begun to explain a difficult passage to a girl who was playing the flute. Just after Jay sings, "Nestling, chirp, and flee," she was saying, "You come in with your trill, doo-loo-loo, ooh. Do you see the place on your score? Good." "Ah, John," Mrs. Quaver exclaimed, seeing him in his place, "I'm glad you're not absent. As I have just told the others this afternoon, we're having the first joint rehearsal of my arrangements of A Boy's Song by James Hogg. We've been over all the individual parts and all the sections you will recall. Now it's time to fit the pieces together." John nervously opened his trumpet case and took out his shining golden trumpet from its bed of scarlet velvet. The beautiful new instrument gave him confidence. He worked the valves nimbly with his fingers and looked up at Mrs. Quaver again. "Now, John," she said, tell me when your little solo begins." "Right after the end of the second verse," John promptly replied. He had practiced his part every evening in the basement at home for the last 2 weeks. He knew every note perfectly. After the line, "That's the way Billy and me." "Good," Mrs. Quaver said. "And don't forget what I told you, John. This is a happy song. I want you to play ta-ta, 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 simply repeating the rhythm in your voice. And I want you to be light and lively. This is supposed to be a song of a boy who loves romping in the country." Ta-ta, 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 John thought. That shouldn't be too difficult. Even with the whole orchestra listening to him, he'd played it over and over again at home, but he would have to try extra hard here. This was to be his first solo. Everyone else was depending on him to play it properly. "Right," said Mrs. Quaver brightly. With her baton, she tapped twice sharply on the music stand before her. All the musicians brought their instruments into playing position. Susan poised her bow over the strings of her violin. John held his trumpet close to his mouth and wiggled his fingers on the valves. Mrs. Quaver's baton moved from side to side up, and then down. And the cymbals clashed and the drums thumped. The pianist brought his fingers down on the ivory keys to the piano. The violinist and the cellists made the wheeling and whumping sounds and were all in perfect unison. The rehearsal had begun. After the introduction, one of the older boys began to sing. After the last line of the first verse, John's fellow trumpeter echoed the rhythm of the singer's voice, ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta. Mrs. Quaver smiled approvingly at the successful performance, and with her baton gave the singer the signal to begin the second verse. And the oboe played and the flute warbled according to plan. John swallowed with an effort and put the mouthpiece of his trumpet to his lips for his solo. The mouthpiece instantly changed to chocolate. Then, almost as fast as chocolate spread along the instrument, changing all the flashing gold into a dull brown. The first note came out fairly true, ta, but the chocolate trumpets could not withstand such pressure. The hole in the mouthpiece softened and clogged up, and the valves stuck as John desperately tried to finish his part. Mrs. Quaver's eyes almost popped out of her head as she listened to him play. It sounded as though John were trying to play a soap-filled bubble pipe. Terribly flustered, he put his trumpet down. Mrs. Quaver was speechless. The orchestra was rocked by an uproarious laughter. The other trumpeter leaned over towards John's chair and picked up the trumpet. "It's a chocolate trumpet!" he shouted. "No wonder it sounded like that. John Midas was trying to play a chocolate." John didn't wait to hear any more. He fled from the stage and out to the playground. Without stopping to look around, he ran through the stone gateway onto his house. Okay, we're going to stop there. Next week, when I give you my last edition of Tucked In Tuesday, you will find out what happens to John Midas, and we'll see if everything in his mouth can stop turning to chocolate. All right, boys and girls, I hope you've had a great year here at RGS. I know we've had lots of fun with you. Tomorrow's your first day of summer vacation. I hope you have lots and lots of fun things planned with your families, and we can't wait to see you back here in the fall. Don't forget, tune in next week for our last edition of Tucked In Tuesday. Have a great night.